Hey, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and today is Q&A day. So before we jump into the questions for today, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor for all Friday episodes for the month of November. Our sponsor is UCAN. So I chatted a little bit about UCAN last week, but I do want to give you just a quick background of the company itself and how the company actually came about, because it's actually a really cool story. So the patented ingredient within UCAN's products is an ingredient called Superstarch, and it was actually originally created for a child who was born in 2001 with a rare metabolic disorder called glycogen storage disease. And basically this disorder prevented him from being able to break down glycogen, which we just know is the storage form of glucose or sugar in our body. And this basically meant that his parents had to feed him every 2 hours to be able to maintain his blood sugar levels and to prevent seizures. So obviously that is something that is not very practical, like literally every 2 hours through the night, 24/7, every single day. So their family basically wanted to find a carbohydrate that could provide a steady, slow release of energy. And they seeked out help from different scientists and started evaluating different types of carbohydrates. And they found that there was a way that you could cook certain carbohydrates in a very slow process to yield a very slow digesting carbohydrate. And this patented cooking method was actually applied to non-GMO cornstarch to deliver a slow, steady release of glucose over several hours. And this is a patented process that was discovered in Europe, and this is the process that they use to create Superstarch. So the UCAN company was actually formed for the purposes of actually manufacturing this carbohydrate, which is now called Superstarch, for this child, Jonah, who had this metabolic disorder. And so the story is really, really cool. And they did figure out, after a few years of doing some more research, they started conducting clinical trials and implementing Superstarch with athletes, and found that they could actually, that this product could actually supply athletes with a steady release of energy and prevent spikes and crashes within their blood sugar levels throughout activity. So that's kind of how Superstarch came about within the athletic population. Dr. Jeff Volek and the Olympic sports dietitian Bob Sieber actually do a lot of research with this ingredient or with Superstarch, and it's used in Olympic athletes, it's used in college athletes. So it's super cool, and I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of background with you, just so that you understood kind of where this product came from, because it is a very interesting story, and it's really, actually saved Jonah's life. So it's pretty cool. And if you want to, check out more info or try out the products for yourself, you can go to the website www.ucan.co/METFLEXLIFE. You can learn more about them. You can use the discount code METFLEXLIFE for 20% off your order. Check out the different products they offer. I will be chatting a little bit about how I personally use their products pre-workout next week. So I'm going to give you a little recipe of how I personally use their products. So look forward to that. And I am going to stop mumbling on, but I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's just a super cool story, and one of the reasons why, I support this company and this product, not just because I love the way it makes me feel during my workouts, but because they have a really cool story behind it, and it was literally created to save a child's life. So anyway, I'm going to jump into the questions for today, and let's do it. All right, first question. What's a good workout split for 5 to 6 days a week for wanting to build muscle? Okay, great question. So before I get into the different workout splits that I personally use and that I program for my clients, I do want to mention that first and foremost, the best workout split is going to be the one that you can stick to week after week. So the number of days that you can commit to consistently working out or going to the gym or lifting at home, whatever it is, that's going to dictate the split that's ideal for you. Because if you're constantly missing sessions, if you're not enjoying your workouts because maybe you are maybe if you are going to the gym 5 to 6 days a week and that just is not realistic for your personal lifestyle and your schedule, then you're not going to be able to stick to that consistently for, a longer period of time. And that's going to make it a lot harder to be able to, progress through your workouts and focus on, we know building muscle requires progressive overload. It requires, following through with hitting the required muscle groups, muscle movement patterns, all of that, getting enough volume in each week and splitting it up in a way that is effective for you and it allows you to recover and all of that. So that's just something to think about. Like, you need to pick your split based off of the amount of days that you can personally commit to. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you can absolutely build muscle with a 3-time per week program, a 4-time per week program, even a 2-time per week program, right? So this all depends on where you're coming from and what we call your training age. So your training age is just basically the amount of time that you've been lifting or following a progressive structured program, right? So not necessarily like, for the past 5 or 6 years, you've been lifting on and off. You've been kind of just going to the gym, randomly throughout the weeks and just kind of doing random exercises. That's something that I would say, your training age in that case would not be like 5 years. So for example, for me, I did triathlons in college. I did a little bit of lifting here and there. When I went to grad school, I started doing CrossFit, but it wasn't until about like 2.5, 3 years ago when I really committed to actually lifting to build muscle, right? That was about, 2.5 years ago now. So my training age is not, 6+ years for when I was lifting, randomly throughout that time, or even going to CrossFit or whatever it may be. For me, I would pretty much say that my training age is about 2.5 years, because that is the time, 2.5 years, because that's the time that I've consistently been following a progressive structured program and actually focused on, building muscle versus just, working out just to work out, which is what I'm pretty much did for CrossFit, just like a fun workout. But anyway, now I'm getting off topic. So your training age will determine, how many days a week that you should actually start out at, right? Because if you are new to lifting and new to following a structured program, then in that case, more is definitely not better. So the reason for this is because we know, building muscle requires progressive overload, right? So basically your total volume needs to increase over time. That is what defines progressive overload, is increasing your total volume over time, which will allow you to build muscle, build strength, all of that. And when we talk about volume, if you don't really know what volume refers to, it's basically quantified as sets times reps times weight. That's how most people define what volume is. So the amount of sets that you do times your reps times your weight. That should give you a number, like a solid number for volume. And then that we want to see that increase over time. This is a little bit confusing, and I like to kind of, instead of referring to volume as that and focus on that, we can simplify this by just quantifying volume as your total number of hard sets. And hard sets meaning the sets that you perform in the 5 to 20 rep range with an intensity of somewhere between like 1 to 3 reps left in the tank, which is 1 to 3 RIR, or reps in reserve. So that's how, I would define volume, and that's how, that's what we know, within that 5 to 20 rep range, and training with an intensity of about 1 to 3 reps in the tank, 1 to 3 reps left in the tank. We know that is the place where you will be building the most muscle, and those rep ranges and that intensity. So that's just based off of what we know in the science, in the literature, and how this all works, right? So like I said, if you're a complete newbie to lifting, or maybe, again, you haven't followed a structured progressive program in recent years, then you can absolutely make gains and absolutely build muscle training 3 times a week. Again, if it's a structured, smart program and you're hitting all the necessary muscle groups or movement patterns every single week, you can absolutely build muscle with just 3 times per week. So, and when I say movement patterns, I mean making sure that you are hitting all of your making sure that you're hitting knee dominant, hip dominant, push, pull, and core movements. So that is kind of how, and I talked about this in a previous episode with how to kind of structure training. I will have to link that in the show notes. I forgot which episode it's called, but I kind of go over the different movement patterns and how to kind of build an effective program. But anyway, I'm not going to dive into that today, but we know that, progression over time requires gradually increasing the number of hard sets. So as you become more advanced, you'll likely need more volume to continue to build. And that's when you may have to shift to 4 or 5 days, just because you'd be spending a long ass time in the gym if you were trying to hit enough volume on just 3 of those days per week. So that's when, just if you're someone who is new to lifting, consistently, then just jumping right into 5 days per week is just unnecessary because you don't need that much volume to be able to build muscle. And it's like, in this case, more is not better. You want to kind of work your way up and get as much, get the minimal effective dose now that you can get to build muscle, and then progress over time, because you will need to increase your volume over time, which will in turn probably require, adding more days a week to your training. So hopefully that makes sense. But personally, I stick to 4 or 5 days per week of lifting. And with my clients, generally we're programming 3 to 5 days, depending on where they're coming from, depending on their training age, with 1 to 2 days of conditioning or cardio on top of that, again, depending on their specific situation. So if you are, if you're someone who's super busy, you have lots going on with your family, maybe lots going on at work, and you have other life stressors outside of training, which most of us do, you're likely going to get the best results on either a 3 or 4 day per week training split. So I do want to get, I will go over 5 and 6 day per week splits, just because that was the original question. But again, you don't, to build muscle, you don't need to just, and if you're new, or even if you are intermediate, you do not need to jump into a 5 or 6 day per week program, as long as you're following a structured, progressive program within, 3 to 5 days per week. So for example, for me, again, I am about 2.5 years into my training age, and I have the most days per week I train is 5 days per week, or 5 day per week split. I haven't gone up to 6 days. And I just recently gone up to 5 days. So I go back and forth between 4 or 5 days, per week, within at least this last year. So I do want to kind of talk about, though, a few of the different splits and how you can break them up. So I will run through that. So for, 2 or 3 times per week, if that is the split that you want to follow, or if that's the amount of days that you want to lift, then I would definitely recommend a full body split, so that you can hit all the necessary muscle groups within, with including enough volume each week. Because we do know that most research shows that when volume is equated, training every muscle group at least twice per week is a little bit more optimal for muscle growth than just training it once per week. So with 3 times per week, you can do a full body for all 3 days. You could even do a full body, on day 1, day 2 could be an upper body, and day 3 could be lower body. So with 3 days per week of training, you could do full body all 3 days, which is probably what I would recommend and what I program for my clients, or you could go full body, upper body, lower body. And then when we get to 4 times per week split, usually 4 times per week is, and this is what I program for most all of my clients, is an upper lower split. So, 2 days of upper body, 2 days of lower body, and you're basically just dividing that up throughout the week. So upper lower. And that would be 4 times per week. And then you can also, another way to split up your training for 4 times per week, and this is something I've done in the past, is a full body program 4 times per week, following a push-pull split. So what that would look like is that all 4 days you are training full body, right? So in the program that I followed in the past, and that I have, wow, I just lost my train of thought, that I structure for some of my clients, is with this, which is not as common as the upper lower split. A lot of people just really like the upper lower split, and I do as well. But another kind of option is that you can train 4 times per week, push, pull, and you are doing basically a lower body movement at the beginning of each workout. Maybe you're doing 1 or 2 exercises, maybe a compound movement, and then an accessory movement for your lower body movement for 4 days per week. And then after that, you're doing upper body. So for example, for Monday, if you did a push day, you could do maybe squats, and then you would get into more pushing movements in the upper body. And then Tuesday, maybe you did some type of deadlift, and then you got into maybe, upper body movements, and you kind of just swap that for 4 days a week. So it'd be push, pull, all full body every single day. That's a little bit more intense for most people, but it is an option, and it's a good option, especially if you are going from if you've been following an upper lower split for a long time and you still want to train 4 times per week, but you want to kind of switch things up, that could be a good option. So for 5 times per week, there are a few different options here. So you could follow an upper lower push pull lower split. This is something that I'm currently doing. So Mondays I do upper body, Tuesdays I do lower body, Thursdays I do pushing exercises or pushing movements, upper body. Fridays I do pulling movements, upper body, and then Saturday I do lower body again. So I have 3 days of upper body, 2 days of lower body. Or you can swap this, and this is what I did. My last training cycle was I did 3 days of lower body and 2 days of upper body. So for 5 days a week, I was doing lower, upper, lower, upper, lower. That's a way to split it up. Again, you can also split up 5 days per week doing a full body program, which is something that I've also done in the past, which it is a lot, but I definitely saw a lot of gains during that time. So this would look like 5 days a week doing push, pull, and then maybe some type of hybrid training. So when I say hybrid, I just mean incorporating, maybe it's like a body part specialization. So for example, when I was doing this program, I really wanted to focus on building my glutes and my shoulders. So on that hybrid day or that 5th day, I did a lot of glute and shoulder specialization work. So that's another way to kind of break it up. And then for 6 times per week, you could do a lower push pull, lower push pull split. That's a common one. Or you could do a push pull, lower split. So again, I mean, I think hearing this, it's a little bit confusing hearing, push pull, lower, whatever, just over a podcast. I feel like it's hard to resonate with what that actually looks like. But again, if you are, if you're interested in getting more dialed in on your training, you want to incorporate these different types of programs, I would definitely recommend checking out my website. I do offer programs. The ones that I have up there currently, 2 of my current programs are 3 times per week. So Kickstart is all body weight and resistance bands 3 times per week. Level Up is a 3 times per week split full body that includes weights. And then my other program is Elevate, which is a 4 times per week upper lower split. So it's upper lower. So check out those programs. And then if you're interested in something beyond that, or if you're also interested in just more customized or specific to what you're looking for, I also with all of my one-on-one clients, I program for them as well, and we figure out exactly what you want to focus on and build a training program around that. But general recommendations, if you are, like I said, if you're a beginner, 3 to 4 training sessions per week for about, 40 to 60 minutes is a good place to start. If you're an intermediate, maybe, 4 to 5 training sessions per week, probably around, an hour to 90 minutes of training for each. And then if you're more advanced, 5 to 6 sessions per week, around that hour to 90 minutes. So that's those are just general recommendations. Again, the biggest thing with this is adherence. So that's the most important thing. You need to pick a split that that you could adhere to and consistently follow through with week after week for at least, I would say, like 3 months on end to be able to actually commit to it. And that is the split that I would follow. So if you know that you can for sure commit to 3 times per week for the next 2 months, then choose a 3 times per week split. If you know you can commit to 4, then do that. If you can commit to 5 or 6, if you are more advanced, then definitely, go for that. And this is something too, if you have no idea where you should start, then obviously hiring a coach and someone that can help you with that is going to be very advantageous. And again, if you want to check out my programs, I will link those in the show notes, or you can go to metflexlife.com/programs to check out all of those. And then if you want to apply for one-on-one coaching, you can always go to my website again, metflexlife.com/apply, and apply for coaching. All right, let's get into the next question. Okay, next question. This is another question related to building muscle. So someone asked, I want to gain muscle. Is it necessary to eat every few hours? I usually eat 3 meals a day. Okay, so before we jump into kind of eating frequency or the amount of meals that you're eating per day, I do want to just quickly touch on the basics to optimizing your muscle building potential in general, because this is something a lot of people forget about. They're like, focusing, and this is something that we, talk about all the time with nutrition too. It's like, first we have to make sure that all of these things are in place first before we talk about the other specific things. And this comes down to that concept of, majoring in the minor. A lot of people tend to look at these little, look at the things that are, not as important, and only become important when you have all the other things dialed in, right? So this would be one of those things, eating frequency throughout the day to build muscle. It is absolutely important. I'm going to talk about my recommendations in a second, but in order to optimize your muscle building potential in general, you do have to make sure that you're following a few basics first. And so the first one would be proper resistance training. So committing to a long-term and structured plan that you can, 1, adhere to, which is what I just talked about in the last question. 2 is challenging and fun for you. And 3 includes adequate volume and intensity, which I also talked about in the last question. The second main thing is progressive overload. So we do know that your body adapts to progression over time. So each week you must basically just do a little bit more. And this is, what I talked about with that volume. So you need to do, an extra rep, added weight, more sets, maybe a harder RIR. So going from, if you've been doing 3 reps in reserve, moving to 2 reps in reserve, 1 rep in reserve. So adding a little bit more intensity each week, adding a little bit more each week in terms of overall volume or overall hard sets, like I talked about, that is super important. The second thing is something that a lot of people don't want to pay attention to sometimes. And this is, I fall into this category sometimes as well. I think we all do. It's just recovery, right? And realizing that in order to build muscle, you must be recovering properly. So this includes, making sure you're sleeping, making sure you're managing your stress, making sure you are fueling appropriately, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Making sure that you're performing, mobility and tissue work to make sure that you are going into your workouts, prepped and ready to go. So doing before I lift, I always have like a little primer circuit that I do, and that I always, recommend for my clients, just like priming your body, getting ready for the lift, not just getting to the gym and then right away just, putting the bar on your back to do squats. Like that is a recipe for injury. So you want to make sure that you are doing everything you can to, recover, not just, after your workout, but before as well, because, making sure that you can prevent as much injury as possible is going to be super important so that you don't, so that you're not maybe, out of commission for a little while, and that is going to hinder your progress with building muscle, obviously. So again, recovery is super important in all aspects. And also part of recovery is also incorporating deload weeks. So I actually talked about deload weeks in last week's episode, I believe, or the week before. I'll link that in the show notes. And then to get to your question, the last piece of that is going to be fueling appropriate to optimize muscle gain, right? So this is, like I said, this is what we'll kind of talk about in terms of, meal frequency. So just in general, first, when you're looking to optimize your muscle building potential and to, build as much muscle as possible, you want your caloric intake to be at maintenance level calories or in a slight surplus. So we do know that it is possible to build muscle and also lose body fat at the same time, which we call body recomposition. But there are different factors and scenarios that you need to consider when we are talking about body recomp. So it does go beyond just, a simple yes or no in terms of being able to build muscle and lose body fat at the same time. And I actually talk about this in depth with Dr. Bill Campbell in episode 45, The Science of Body Recomposition. So I'll link that in the show notes if you're interested in that. But again, going back to the main goal of building muscle, if that's your main goal, you probably don't want to be in a deficit because your body is going to be less likely to prioritize building muscle, right? So if the main goal is building muscle, then probably don't want to be in a deficit. Just makes sense, right? Your body is going to prioritize other things if you're in a deficit versus prioritizing, that's a hard word to say, building muscle. So included in that as well is making sure that you're consuming, before we get to the nutrient timing part of things, making certain that you are consuming nutrient dense, real food that is tailored to your personal macros and optimizing your performance for you, right? So tailoring your macros, whether it's following a lower carb, higher carb, moderate carb, whatever it is, tailored to you that makes you feel the best during your performance, right? So that's another thing to kind of think about before we even get into the frequency of meals per day. So actually getting into that now, the biggest thing with meal frequency is I believe that's around protein intake. So that's another thing. You want to make sure, absolutely, and I talk about this all the time, that you are consuming enough protein to be able to build muscle, right? So getting into your question, is it necessary to eat every few hours? You said I usually eat 3 meals a day. This is where, we can kind of get a little bit more nitpicky in terms of protein intake. And that's really where I would focus on with your meals is around protein. So we do know that in order to build and also maintain muscle, we need adequate protein, right? So protein is the only macronutrient that has nitrogen, which is essential to building muscle. So, no matter how many carbs and fats you're consuming, without adequate protein or nitrogen intake, you're not going to have the materials needed to be able to build muscle. You're not going to have adequate amino acids, adequate nitrogen to be able to actually build muscle. So adequate protein in general is number one, usually around 0.8 to about 1 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight per day is ideal for most people who are focused on building muscle as the primary goal. So you can for sure, get that in 3 meals per day. You can for sure get, 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight in 3 meals per day. Again, as you are heavier, right, the harder that's going to be, because that means that you're going to have more protein within your meals. So, someone who's 150 pounds versus someone who's 250 pounds, that's going to be a lot more protein within each meal. But you can, if you can do that, you can absolutely consume 3 meals per day and build muscle. But when we're talking about optimizing muscle building, I think that protein frequency does play a role. And this is where meal timing and the amount of meals you consume per day and the frequency of those meals really matters, and in my opinion. So some people will say that total protein intake across the day is all that matters, but I personally argue that protein frequency, which is the amount of protein feedings you have across the day and also the spacing of those protein feedings, is important. Again, we're talking about optimization here with building muscle. Again, you can still build muscle with lower protein and maybe less meals, but it might not be optimal. So optimization is the name of the game right now. So the reason for this is it has to do with this concept called muscle protein balance. So the rate of muscle protein synthesis, which is just the muscle protein synthesis is just the process that we go through to build muscle, right? You're using the protein you consume to build muscle. The rate of muscle protein synthesis to muscle protein breakdown determines your protein balance. And we do know that muscle mass is regulated by maintaining a balance between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown, specifically a positive balance, right? So to build muscle, you need to spend more time in a positive protein balance than a negative one. That just makes sense. And we know that, resistance training is one of the most effective ways to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and thus leads to muscle hypertrophy, which is just muscle growth. But protein distribution and timing throughout the day can also be a key factor for optimizing muscle growth, like I just mentioned. So this ties into another concept known as the muscle full effect. So again, we know that, eating adequate protein triggers muscle protein synthesis, which again is just the process of building muscle. When you consume enough protein, it actually saturates the muscle, and this is known as the muscle full effect. So from research, we know that two main things happen in regard to the muscle full effect after you consume protein. The first thing is about, and this is, I want you to understand this because it will make everything else make sense. But the first thing is that about 30 minutes after consuming an adequate amount of protein, the rate of muscle protein synthesis can actually almost triple. And then the second thing is about 90 minutes after consumption, the rate of muscle protein synthesis peaks before returning to baseline levels after about 2 hours. So the interesting part of this is that the return to baseline actually will occur regardless of how much protein is still available in your bloodstream, right? So this means that even if you ate, all of your protein in one big meal in the day, such as, following an OMAD approach or a 1 meal a day approach, you would only be technically spiking muscle protein synthesis once in your entire day, even though you still hit your protein target, right? So if you're 150 pounds and you are following an OMAD approach where you're just eating 1 meal a day, then you would have to consume 150 grams of protein in that one meal, which, first of all, that's a lot, and it's probably not going to be ideal for digestion, but just also in the sense of what we're talking about here is that you're only going to be spiking protein synthesis once. And the reason for this is because the amino acid leucine is essentially the trigger for muscle protein synthesis. You can kind of think of this as like a light switch, right? So when you spike leucine, or you spike, when you can consume amino acids, you consume protein, or amino acids when you consume protein, turns into amino acids in your body. But one of the specific amino acids is leucine, and that is what triggers muscle protein synthesis. So it's like a light switch that you turn on, right? So you can think of that as leucine being kind of that switch. So even though you may have plenty amino acids circulating in your bloodstream from the amount of, protein you took in, you need a bolus of leucine, which is generally around like a 25 gram or more dose of protein that contains at least 2.5 grams of leucine to actually trigger or stimulate muscle protein synthesis again. So this is when feeding, or protein feeding and protein frequency throughout your day, comes into play. Again, when it comes to optimizing muscle growth, the muscle full effect concept seems to show that there's an advantage to hitting your leucine threshold. Again, this occurs when you consume about 2.5 grams of leucine in most people, rather than just eating one or a few big meals per day. So if your goal is to maximize your muscle building potential, you'll want to spike muscle protein synthesis multiple times throughout the day, right? That makes sense. And although the research, it's not absolute here, there is, some conflicting research in that regard, but my recommendation, is based on what we do know about muscle protein synthesis, what we know about leucine, what we know about the muscle full effect, which I just explained. That is when, spreading your protein intake evenly across 4 to 6 meals is probably a good place to be, with at least 25 grams or more of protein at each meal, to ensure that you are spiking that you are spiking muscle protein synthesis, because we know that, if you're getting at least 25 grams of protein, obviously from good high quality sources, and more so from animal-based sources, and it has the, right amino acid profile, it has enough leucine in there, then you will be spiking muscle protein synthesis. And if you can do that, 4 to 6 times per day, that's probably going to be, a good place to be. And again, we're talking about optimization here. So 3 meals a day is good, right? But I would maybe add 1 or 2 more protein snacks in there as well, just to, again, make sure you're optimizing what your goal is. And that's to build as much muscle as possible, right? I need to take a sip of water. I feel like I just rambled on for so long. But hopefully that makes sense in terms of feeding frequency or meal frequency throughout the day. And then just a last quick note here. I did come across a recent study a few days ago that actually looked at protein distribution throughout the day, specifically consuming higher amounts of protein at breakfast and lunch versus at dinner. So the study did have some limitations, of course, just like all studies do, but overall it concluded that for resistance-trained induced muscle hypertrophy, which is just muscle, hypertrophy just means building muscle, ability to build muscle. So for resistance-trained induced muscle hypertrophy in healthy young men, consuming a protein-enriched meal at breakfast and less protein at dinner while achieving an adequate overall protein intake is more effective than consuming more protein at dinner. So that's what this study found, because they basically had two groups, one consuming more protein at breakfast and one consuming more protein at dinner. And they found that the group that consumed more protein at breakfast actually had, was able to, I just lost my train of thought, was able to induce more muscle hypertrophy versus the group that consumed more protein at dinner. Again, though, this is just one study. There were limitations, but it's just something to think about, right? And I would say that I thought this was cool because it actually compared breakfast versus dinner. But there are many studies that do compare like protein feeding throughout the day and actually, spiking that leucine or spiking that muscle protein synthesis through spiking leucine multiple times throughout your day, right? So again, this is just something to think about. If the goal is to optimize your muscle building potential, I will link that full study in the show notes so you can check it out. Again, it was just a recent one that I came across a few days ago. And I actually, this question came in like the day before I came across that. So I thought it was kind of interesting to mention. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Again, optimization is the name of the game here. And if we are looking to optimize all things with muscle building, following through with the things that I mentioned in terms of proper resistance training, progressive overload, optimal recovery, fueling appropriately to optimize muscle building potential, and then looking at the kind of, that would be like the lower hanging fruit, and then like the more specifics would be meal timing and frequency throughout the day, and then even getting into like supplementation and things like that. So anyway, hopefully that answered your question. All right, last question today. To reduce cellulite, what do you recommend first, fat loss or muscle building? Okay, so this is a great question, and I feel like it's a question that a lot of women have, especially, and it's something that I definitely struggle with for a long time, which I'll get into in a second. But the first thing you just need to think about here when we're addressing this question is it does depend, how much body fat you actually have to lose in terms of where you're going to focus first. So if you have, maybe 35 to 40, like if you are 35 to 40% body fat or above, I would say more so focusing on fat loss first is going to be ideal, while also incorporating some type of resistance training and building muscle at the same time, which we know, like I just mentioned, in body recomposition, that topic is absolutely possible, right? So, but when you are, when you do have more body fat to lose, I would say focusing more on fat loss first is probably going to be your best bet. If you have less body fat to lose, and you're already, maybe you're at like 25%, 20%, and you still have, cellulite that you want to reduce, I personally think the best place to start with that is probably focusing on building muscle. And this is because, it just kind of makes sense. The more muscle you have, especially in your lower body, kind of the more filled out you will be, right? So just think about it like the more muscle you have in your glutes, around your around your upper leg area where most of us have cellulite. Most of us women have cellulite around our hip area. That's definitely the place that I used to have the most cellulite around my hips, kind of my knee area, or my quad area. So if you can focus on, kind of increasing your muscle mass in that area, that will fill things out, right? And it just kind of makes sense. Like the more muscle you have in that area, it's not like the muscle itself is, quote unquote, getting rid of the cellulite. It's filling that area out. And the more muscle you have, the lower actually your body fat percentage will be, and hopefully the less body fat you'll have as well, right? So if you're building more muscle, we know muscle is very metabolically active, and it's going to be very advantageous to, building kind of the physique that you want, and also hopefully reducing cellulite in that aspect. And I can speak to this from personal experience, just because I did grow up super subconscious of my legs, because I always had cellulite. Like I think I talked about this before, but I hated wearing shorts during the summer, especially like in high school, because I had a lot of cellulite. I think cellulite is, there's a genetic component to that as well, because my mom and my sister all had a lot of cellulite, my grandparents, and so in high school, I had a lot of cellulite. It was very, uncomfortable. And it really did not go away for me until I started lifting weights. So even, running and doing triathlons in college, like I never saw, even when I lost body fat, I never saw the cellulite go away until I started focusing on lifting weights, started focusing on squatting more, doing more hip thrusts, doing more deadlifts, like building my lower body. That's when I started to see the cellulite go away. And so I definitely recommend, focusing on lower body resistance training if you do struggle with cellulite, because that is, like I said, it's going to fill out that area. And I can say this, firsthand experience working with clients. I've seen it, even like my mom and sister, when they started lifting weights, like their cellulite started going away. And so, yeah, just from personal experience, I think that is probably, focusing on lower body resistance training, lifting heavy, doing squats, doing hip thrusts, deadlifts, things like that, versus just maybe like, focus on cardio. I think that's probably going to be a really good way to reduce cellulite, especially if you are at a lower body fat percentage. So again, make sure to check out my exercise programs if you need a place to start. I will link those in the show notes, or you can go to METFLEXLIFE /programs. I have a bunch of exercise programs up there, and also nutrition programs to kind of help you get started with lifting if you don't know where to start. So anyway, that is all the questions we have for today. I hope that answered your questions. I hope you kind of took away some nuggets of info. Sorry, I just moved my microphone and made a weird noise. And I do want to give another quick shout out to our sponsor for the month of November for all Friday episodes, UCAN. If you want to check out the UCAN products, if you want to learn more about their story and how they came about, then definitely go to www.ucan.co/METFLEXLIFE. And if you want to try out their products, you can use the discount code METFLEXLIFE for 20% off. I will link that code in the website in the show notes. If you're listening to this on iTunes, you can just swipe up to see the show notes. If you're listening to it on another platform, usually there's like a more info button. So yeah, hopefully you learned something from this episode. If you have any follow-up questions or anything else that you want me to touch on, just let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them in future episodes. All right, have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time.